Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Embattled, undisputed super featherweight champion Alicia Baumgardner posted this to her social media, a caption that reads, "I will say, Mayer and I sold that fight in London. It's time for the US," hinting at a potential rematch, at least an expressed desire for one. But Mikaela Mayer has since moved on. She's moved up from super featherweight, up to lightweight, then super lightweight, and I think currently she's on her way to welterweight, in all likelihood to face Natasha Jonas, the current reigning IBF welterweight champion. I think that as far as Mikaela Mayer is concerned, a rematch with Alicia is unnecessary.
Immediately after their fight, she wanted an immediate rematch, but now she's moved on, and she's not coming back down.
Given Mikaela Mayer's physical dimensions, that she was always very big for 130 pounds, and her age, that she's in her early 30s, approaching her mid-30s, making 130 pounds, continuing to do it, even for a Baumgardner rematch. At this point, it's unnecessary. It may be out of the question. It's not a secret what Alicia is going through. It's not a secret that she tested positive for a banned substances, per some reports, and we don't even know what the word is with that. News has gone quiet as far as what's next for Alicia Baumgardner. Will the sanctioning bodies, will they strip her? Will the outcome of the Lenardatu rematch,
be reversed?
Will it be overturned based on that positive test?
That's what happened when Alejandra Jimenez tested positive for a banned substance after the Franton Cruz fight. She was stripped of the titles that she won, and the outcome of the fight was overturned to a no contest.
Is that going to happen to Alicia while she's in the market for a rematch with Mikaela Mayer? Mikaela, who may no longer be interested because as far as she's concerned, Alicia is a disgraced fighter, a disgraced champion. Such is the byproduct of testing positive for a banned substance in the sport of boxing, that irrespective of what you might think and what I might think, what Mikaela might think is, I don't need to fight Alicia again because she's a dirty fighter.
Mikaela's not the one that needs redemption.
She's not the one in the hot seat right now. She's not the one trying to prove her innocence. Any news in reference to Alicia Baumgardner's anti-doping fiasco has since gone quiet, though she herself hasn't spent the time in hiding. She's taken a liking to making public appearances at college football games, and she seems to be enjoying herself. She's not crying in the bathtub about it. Irrespective of the radio silence in reference to her anti-doping fiasco, we can make the inference that there may be a provisional suspension of some kind, provided that she's cooperating with the powers that be, because what we normally see when a fighter tests positive for a banned substance is upwards of a year's suspension, reduced down to 6 months, so long as the fighter cooperates with the sanctioning bodies and the powers that be. That Alicia, she may not be able to even fight right now.
Nobody's saying it.
But she may not be able to fight right now. None of the journos are reporting on it. We haven't heard much about it from Eddie Hearn or Alicia Baumgardner herself. But in all likelihood, she has to sit out what remains of this year and perhaps some portion of next year due to what could be a provisional suspension.
She wants to fight Mikaela Mayer again.
That's not saying that the rematch between them can't happen. It can happen, but it can happen at a later time. Not at this time. Mikaela Mayer's all the way up there at 140, headed to 147, and I think she's got her eyes fixed on a Natasha Jonas fight, which I told you, given the network relationship between Top Rank and Sky and Boxer, it's a sensible fight for the both of them. Mikaela Mayer is not thinking about a Baumgardner rematch at this time, even if Alicia is.
In one sentence, Alicia Baumgardner, she's barking up the wrong tree.
In men's middleweight and super middleweight news, WBC interim champion Carlos Adames is hoping for a Canelo fight. "I will make Canelo run from me." Yet another fighter standing online, single file, hoping he can land a Canelo fight. In truth, it's not like Carlos has anything better to do. It's not like the WBC is about to order the fight between him and Jermall. Everyone talks about being ready to fight Canelo and being able to beat him, said Adames on his social media account. They always say they have a plan or a specific tactic to beat him, but when they get in the ring, they just start running and fight like amateurs. Even the light heavyweights and super middleweights fear him. The only person who has been able to trade punches with me and fight punch to punch is Montiel, and that is why I have the utmost respect for him. With Adames throwing his name into the mix, If Alvarez gives him what he's asking for, the Dominican native will have to move up in weight. If that's all it takes to get his hands on arguably the sport's biggest star, Adames won't have an issue placating Alvarez's wishes.
Adames's account of events is not entirely true.
Juan Macias Montiel was not the only fighter that was able to go toe-to-toe with him. Does the name of Patrick Teixeira, Brazil's Patrick Teixeira, does his name ring a bell? Many years ago, I don't know, maybe it was 2 or 3.
He went toe-to-toe with Carlos. He's a mid-range to inside fighter. He's a phone booth fighter. And he beat Carlos. This was many years ago.
Back when Carlos was still an unbeaten fighter, back when Carlos was over there on the top-ranked side of things. He has since paired up with the PBC. As far as the actual matchup, Adames doesn't see a single area where Alvarez would have the edge. Fresh off a knockout win over Julian Williams, Adames has stopped 4 of his last 5 opponents. And while Alvarez may have a chin like no other, Adames is confident that if he lands, the pound-for-pound star will quickly jump on his bicycle.
Yeah, I haven't heard that before.
I will make Canelo run from me, the same way everyone runs from him. He will not be able to trade punches with me and stay on his feet. Haters will come at me for saying this, but I know who I am and what I do. If this fight ever happens, I suggest the PBC place the fight in an arena with no seats, because everybody will be standing and watching. At first glance, you say, why would Carlos Adames be on Canelo's radar? Carlos is an even lesser-known fighter than most of the fighters that want to fight Canelo, the usual suspects like Demetrius and David Benavidez, all these guys. Why would Canelo? Why would he fight Carlos?
Because you can't sell Jamal.
Perhaps when Canelo Alvarez sat down with Al Heyman all those months ago, before he actually inked that 3-fight deal with the PBC, maybe what the plan was to fight both Charlo brothers, Jermell and Jamal. Though behind the piss-poor showing that Jermell just put up, you can't hope to sell a Jermall-Charlo fight. He's even less active than Jermell. I mean, who's gonna buy that fight? I'm a big Canelo Alvarez fan. I usually buy his pay-per-views, but I would struggle to find a reason to buy that one. Jermall is supposed to be en route to a tune-up fight against Jose Benavidez, of all people. That is how far from grace he's fallen.
You're fighting guys that used to campaign as welterweights. You're fighting a guy that Terrence Crawford beat up on.
Well, you can have your plans. That is, you could have had your plans. But at this point in the juncture, you have to know that even with Canelo's drawing power, a fight with Jamal is a tough sell. Behind the piss-poor showing that his brother just put up, you can't possibly hope to sell them the other brother.
No way.
The other Charlo.
That's where Carlos Adames comes into it.
Where he could. I don't know exactly if that's what the plan was. That's what the plan might have been. And on the predication that that's what the plan was, what it might have been, they might need to change that plan, because you cannot sell Jermall Charlo, not against Canelo. So maybe they tell themselves, what if we put Carlos Adames in there with Canelo Alvarez? He's been doing all right, racked up a nice highlight reel knockouts in his last couple of fights. Canelo himself does not seem receptive to a Terrence Crawford fight. Terrence is all tied up with that Spence rematch anyway, right?
Right.
The problem with fighting Carlos Adames is you can't fight him without facing criticism. The winner of Demetrius Andrade versus David Benavidez will seem to many the most worthy candidate to face Canelo Alvarez in Cinco de Mayo of next year. People are going to be asking you to fight the winner of that fight, not Carlos, not a middleweight. Another middleweight. You just fought a junior middleweight, now you're fighting a middleweight. Why are you fighting a middleweight? You're at super middleweight. Why aren't you fighting the winner of David Benavidez versus Demetrius Andrade? That's what the conversation could soon turn into if Canelo were to fight Carlos. Now, I'm not saying that he's going to.
No.
I'm just entertaining that idea and imagining that scenario.
For fighting guys that campaign south of super middleweight, why don't you just fight Terrence Crawford? There's more of a demand for a Terrence Crawford fight than a Carlos Adames fight. No one is asking you to fight Carlos Adames.
He would leave himself open to criticism. Lots of it. What would he be facing in Carlos if he did decide to face him? Well, Carlos is an ambidextrous switch hitter. He can fight orthodox, he can fight southpaw, he's athletic, he's quick, and he's strong. He can punch, though for me and my money, I don't trust his chin. I don't trust his punch resistance.
Don't you remember? Patrick Teixeira rocked this guy. He rattled him, and Patrick's not the biggest puncher. That was all the way down there at 154.
So Canelo can't rattle his cage at 168? Let's not be childish here. Let's not be infantile. There's no way Canelo Alvarez fights this guy without facing criticism for it, because there are two better options, or at least two options people are actually asking for, as opposed to that guy. There's some people, they want Canelo to fight Crawford.
Yeah.
Other people, they're going to want him to fight the winner of Benavidez versus Andrade. And the winner of Benavidez versus Andrade has a legitimate claim to fight Canelo Alvarez. They will be the WBC's interim champion.
And I'm not a hater. I'm a big Canelo Alvarez fan. But I see no reason that he shouldn't face the winner of that fight, Cinco de Mayo, if he's not fighting Terence Crawford.
Perhaps what the plan was to have Canelo fight both the Charlo brothers and cap off that 3-fight deal with a Benavidez fight. Maybe that's what the plan was. The problem is, nobody wants to see Canelo fight Jermall, not based on how he looked against Jermell. That is, how Jermell looked against him. You can't sell that thing. And that's where Carlos Adames comes into it. That is, that's where he might come into it. If push comes to shove and they know they can't sell that Charlo fight, maybe they volunteer this guy to go up there. Maybe they have him fight Canelo Alvarez, though you can't do it without facing criticism. No one is asking Canelo to fight Carlos Adames.
Ideal scenario is Jermall Charlo gets stripped of the WBC title, they give it to Carlos, and then Carlos goes to unify with Yanibek Alimkhanalai. I'd rather see that. I'd rather see a competitive fight that actually has some precedence.
I don't want to see another daring to be great scenario, another chapter in that same book. I've read that book already. In men's junior welterweight and welterweight news, Rolly Romero's coach says, imagine if Rolly would have fought that version of Spence. He would have got him. An overinflated vote of confidence for a fighter who needed a gift stoppage over an old man, a nondescript fighter. As fans begin to toy with the idea, Cromwell Gordon, otherwise known as Coach Bullet, head trainer of Rolly Romero, isn't interested in seeing those two get it on, Terence Crawford and Canelo Alvarez. In his opinion, Crawford is as skilled as they come. However, to go from fighting men at welterweight to a man who's taken out fighters who walk around at nearly 200 pounds is a different...
It's a different animal.
At 168, Crawford's not going to handle Canelo's power at that weight, revealed Gordon to FightHype.com recently, and yet he likes his own fighter to have beaten Errol Spence Jr., the same Errol Spence Jr. that Terence Crawford manhandled. Don't confuse Terence Crawford outclassing Errol Spence Jr. with something that everyone can do because everyone couldn't do it. Everyone didn't do it. The PBC brand of welterweights, the PBC brand of fighters.
Spence was beating those guys. He was good enough to beat those guys, just not good enough to beat Terence.
They want to diminish that. They want to diminish Terence Crawford's victory because they know how it looks. That Errol Spence Jr. was supposed to be one of their best and brightest fighters, one of their premier boxing champions, so easily beaten by Terence Crawford. How does that make the brand look? The PBC stable and all the fighters that fight under that banner. So now what they'll do is they'll tear down Terence Crawford's victory by implying that anybody could have beat that version of Spence, that anybody could have beat that guy, including Rolly Romero.
The guy who needed a gift decision over Jackson Mariñez.
The guy who needed a gift stoppage from Tony Weeks over a very aged Ishmael Barroso, a nondescript late replacement opponent that any world-class fighter, any real world-class fighter would have beat. Just not Rolly. I think that Rolly was actually down on the cards at the time that Tony Weeks waved it off. Over combinations, over punches he was throwing that weren't actually landing. These are the lengths they're willing to go to on that side of the street to prop up their fighter. Even if Spence looked past Romero's size and took him up on his fight offer, fans gave him little to no chance anyway. At one point, Gordon understood where they were coming from. Hell, to a certain extent, he may have agreed with them. With that said, considering that he looked like a shell of his former self, Gordon is convinced that if Romero took Crawford's spot and fought Spence, the outcome would have been the same. Imagine if Rolly would have fought that version of Spence. He would have got him. Anybody fought that version, they would have got him. And that's bullshit. That's just an indirect way of tearing down Terence Crawford's victory over him, because how does it make you all look? Your brand, your banner.
You guys suck.
Errol Spence Jr., up until that point, was doing everything that he normally does. You know, it's not uncommon for Errol to have to take a year off ahead of the Danny Garcia fight. When he was coming right off of the car accident, there was over a year in between the Porter fight and the Garcia fight, and he was still good enough to beat Danny Garcia. In between the Garcia fight and the Ugas fight, there was a year in between there, but he was still good enough to beat Yordenis Ugas, just not good enough to beat Terrence Crawford because he was never on Terrence Crawford's level, and that's why this fight took so long to make. Now, you think that fucking
Clown.
retard, Rolly Romero, you think he could duplicate Terrence Crawford's performance when he could barely get by an old man?
Rolly is everything that's wrong with boxing. He's a joke that isn't funny.
Henceforth, due to Tony Weeks' dubious stoppage in that fight, Rolly Romero can walk away from the sport right now and say that he was good enough to become a world champion. What does it say about boxing as a sport that this guy became a world champion, that someone allowed that to happen, and that currently they're protecting him? Because we all know he's not injured. They just don't trust him to do the job against O'Hara Davies, his mandatory challenger. That if you were going life and death with a nondescript old man, a late replacement, what would O'Hara Davies do to you? He'd take that title, and they don't want that.
He wanted to fight Ryan Garcia. After becoming world champion, first order of business was defending the title against Ryan, and the problem is he's not at liberty to do that because he was under orders to fight O'Hara Davies.
And you really can't trust him to do the job, to deliver against O'Hara Davies, not looking the way that he looked with Ishmael Barroso. As stated, Rolly is a joke that isn't funny, because what does it say about this sport that through some means, Rolly became a champion? Then what does it really mean to become a champion, to be a champion in boxing, when a bozo like Rolly can get a belt? It's bad for the sport's image. Rolly Romero being a world champion, it dilutes the sport, what it means to be a champion, and overall it's bad for the sport's image because what it communicates is that this sport doesn't take itself seriously, because look at this guy.
Boxing the way he boxes, this guy is a world champion.
A testament to how far from grace the American boxing scene has fallen. It used to be a lot harder to get your hands on a world title. Now a guy like Rolly can get one. You think about guys like Marvin Hagler, American legends of the sport, and how many fights he had to have before he got to sniff at a world title, so that in the modern day and age, a retard like Rolly could get one, have one handed to him.
It's a stain.
It's a black eye on the sport. It's almost embarrassing to be a boxing fan knowing that.
It's ridiculous.